Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everybody is doing absolutely great in during this lockdown and taking care of yourself and not getting out if you don't need to. So far, what we have actually done in this marketing section of ours is basically we have studied the marketing strategies, the customer driven marketing, which actually included the market segmentation and the selection of the target market. Then, how can we actually differentiate our product and the services from the rest of the competitors, and how can that differentiation provide this positioning, create this positioning, and the core value for the customers? Now, based upon our previous lectures, we also saw that your products or the services can lie in different categories, and the products can be actually divided in different categories. And we actually discussed it online in the live session, that how can the products be actually shifted in the niche market or maybe other markets. Right now in this session, what we are going to discuss is the pricing strategy. This pricing strategy is actually very important session. Reason being because this session is actually going to link you to the sessions that we actually did on the financial strategies or the financial feasibility that we actually calculated and we studied in the beginning of the semester. Because this through this pricing, what we are going to see is that when are we actually going to have a break even, right? So when we studied this financial feasibility and when we saw that the break even quantity, that quantity break even quantity is one thing and the break even amount is another thing. So we also saw we also discussed, if you remember, in the financial feasibility I showed you an Excel sheet in which we actually discussed in very detail about the livestock feasibility, right? So that livestock feasibility actually gave the break even around approximately around by like 2 years, right? So this is exactly what we are going to actually discuss. We are going to determine the price. Why are we going to actually create that price? Why are we going to actually put that price on our product? What are the possible different strategies through which we can actually attract the customer, right? So the topics which are largely being discussed in this presentation, by the way, this presentation has been actually divided in two parts. The first part is being discussed right now in this lecture, but in the second part what we are going to discuss is that how can we actually calculate the price and how can we calculate the break even, and there'll be a few more topics along with that, right? Now currently what we are going to discuss in this lecture is what is pricing, then the types of different pricing. For example, there's value-based pricing, the cost-based pricing, then different pricing strategies, and this is where our lecture is going to end. In the next lecture, what we are going to actually see is the calculating price based upon cost, then the calculating the price based upon value, and the internal and external considerations for affecting price decisions. So these three topics will actually be discussed in the next lecture. Before actually going to the proceeding ahead, first of all, let's actually define what a price is. Price is the amount of the money charged for a product or service. It is the sum of all the values of the consumers giving up in order to gain the benefits of having or using a product or services. This actually is the definition. This is the definition of Kotler, right? The book that you are actually studying, right? So this is how Kotler actually defines it. Now, the important part in this definition is that it is the amount of the money charged for the product or the service. It is the sum of all the values that the consumers give up, right? So it's actually the value that the consumer is actually looking for, and it is actually the benefit that the consumer is actually looking for in any product or the service. So if you're actually looking at this part, so this definition actually is talking about the value of the customers and the benefits of the customers that you people are going to give in a certain product or a service to the customers, right? So price is actually one of the piece. If you remember, we also studied marketing mix, right? So in marketing mix, price is the only price is the only element which is actually the part of the marketing mix. So if you remember, we studied 7 P's. So there are 7 P's. There are 7 P's that we actually studied, out of which the 4 P's were actually based upon the product, and the 3 P's were actually the services, right? And the 4 P's actually were the product, then price, and then promotion, and what was the fourth one? A product, price, promotion, place, right? So similarly, the 3 P's, they were actually physical environment, process, and people, right? And we also discussed this thing that these out of these, this product, promotion, place, if we actually remove all these piece, the price is the only one which is actually the part of the marketing mix. And why do we actually mix? Why do we do this marketing mix? Why marketing mix is important in marketing strategy? Because we want to create a certain value for the customers. So when we actually talk about the product, when you're offering some new feature in the product, that feature is actually creating a certain value in the minds of the customers, right? But when you're offering a certain price on a certain product, right, that price plays a very important role in creating that value in the minds of the customers. So that is the reason why we want to actually give this price a very, very important, too much of an importance, right? So when we talk about the price is basically the amount of the benefit which is actually being received by the customers, right? So we have actually already discussed this. So there are two types of pricing. One is actually the cost-based pricing, which is generally, it is this price is the cost-based pricing is actually based upon the amount of the cost which is being incurred on developing a product. So when we used to discuss during our sessions in the university, if you remember, we used to say, okay, fine. When we were discussing, especially this financial section, then we used to discuss that, okay, fine. See your cash flows. See the amount of the money which is being, which you are actually using that amount of the money to build one product, right? See what are the different costs: your electricity bills, your gas bills, the amount that you're going to pay to the employees, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are the different costs which actually are generally incurred in developing one product. So based upon those costs, what you do is you generally do a little bit of a margin or a markup. You actually put a markup on that amount of the cost, and then you actually see that, okay, fine, the total cost that incurred in developing a one unit is approximately rupees 1,000. And if you're going to actually have around 20% or 10% of the markup, and that 20% actually represents the amount of the margin that you want to have as a profit, right? So that 20%, you add that 20% over and above to that 1,000, that the cost is which is the cost which is incurring on one product. So that is the amount. Maybe that is 1,200, right? So that 1,200 would be the price of your product. So that 20% is the margin is of your profit, right? But when you talk about the value-based pricing, and by the way, this cost-based pricing, we're going to actually calculate this cost-based pricing ahead, right? So this cost-based pricing specifically is that if you are having like 1,000 rupees or 100 rupees, if we say, to be very simplifying. So if it is like 100 rupees on one cost, on one unit, and you actually add plus 20% on as a markup, that markup is basically this 20% is your profit, right? So that is 120 rupees is the total price that you're going to actually ask from the customer. So this is basically your cost-based pricing. This is a very crude example of your cost-based pricing. We are going to actually calculate it in the next session, in the next part 2 of this lecture series, right? The second part is basically your value-based pricing. Your value-based pricing is based upon generally how much value does a customer give to your product or services. Over here, it is mentioned that the value-based pricing uses the buyer's perception of value, not the seller's cost. So this one is driven by the cost of the seller, right? And this one is actually driven on by the value or the perception or the value, right, of the customer rather than the seller's cost, right? So this actually raises a question that how can we actually initially understand the value that a customer might have, because initially at your stage when you're trying to put one product into the market from the scratch, or you're going to start up, it's just a fresh startup that you're going to have. People do not know what you are offering at this point of time. You have to tell the people that what you're offering at this point of time. So at this point of time, do the customers have a certain value about your product? Well, they might see your product. One of the answers might be they might see your product, they might evaluate what sort of difference are they getting from your product, but they have not evaluated you. Remember one thing, that any customer who wants to buy something from you would either like to have a sort of a guarantee that your product would work as you are telling. So that guarantee is either given by one of the people that the customer know. So in either of the cases, it is very necessary that you must build a trust trust of that customer, right? That trust actually leads to a certain value, right? So in order to create the trust, you have to actually first contact the customer and tell the customer that what you are offering. So initially, what you're going to actually offer is actually the cost-based pricing, right? So initially, when you're offering something to the customer, you are going to actually go for the cost-based pricing rather than the value-based pricing. Once the customer has used your product or the service, that customer is going to develop a certain value about your product, right? And on the later stages, when you keep on selling that product into the market, a certain value is going to be determined by the market about your product. And that is when what you can do is you can actually add up the value-based price on the top of the cost-based price, right? So this is the basic understanding you must have. Initially, you're going to go for this cost-based pricing. The second is your value-based pricing. Your value is generally determined when a customer is either using your product or have used your product, or somebody else has told that customer that your product is worth using. So that value based price is actually, this value is going to come after a little while, right? So because this is based upon the buyer's perception or the belief. So initially, the perception of the belief, if you have developed the perception or the belief of the customer at the first go, well, yes, by all means, what you can do is you can actually go for the value based pricing and the cost based pricing, right? So if you have not developed the perception of the customer initially, and you think that you need to develop the perception of the customer by initially selling them the product, that you by selling them the product, then by all means, this, you are going to go for the cost based pricing. I hope that clarifies. Moving ahead, the value-based pricing is basically has different segmentations. Now, the value can be actually determined by the low pricing that you actually the amount of the price that you're going to keep. They actually, for example, this good value pricing, it offers the right combination of the quality and good services for the fair prices, right? Existing brands are being redesigned to offer more quality for a given price, or the same quality for the less price, right? So what we are going to actually see over here is that in everyday low pricing, that involves the constant everyday low price, right? The one of the examples would be your day-to-day grocery, like tea, maybe, right? That would be your everyday low price. As far as the high low pricing is concerned, your high low pricing generally actually involves charging your higher prices in every day, but they actually give the discounts on the very frequent promotions, and the discounts might be a possibility. You can actually see the different outlets, like the clothing outlets, like Varda, right, and Gul Ahmed, and so on. This is shirt and tie shop. I mean, you just name anyone, right? So what they are doing is they are regularly offering the prices, but their promotions are quite often. I mean, they quite oftenly give the promotions, right? Give away the promotions. Now, similarly, when you actually go ahead with this high low pricing, or the everyday low pricing, or maybe good value pricing. Now, good value pricing is generally considered as a good quality product, and we discussed the air conditioning units yesterday, if you remember, in the online session, the live session that we had, right? And at that time I said that most of the air conditioning units, they actually offer the same price, but they offer something else, which else as well, which is actually the augmented product, which is actually the after sales services, right? So what they're doing is they're actually giving you the good quality, and they're giving you the fair price on which you are able to actually buy the product as well, right? Similarly, this is a value added pricing. This is another type of the value based pricing pricing type segmentation, right? And that is basically the value added pricing, is basically that you actually offering something, some added feature or the services to differentiate the offers to support high prices. For example, you say that, okay, fine, I am selling this one unit of robot vacuum cleaner for around 60,000, let's assume 25,000 rupees. Now that 25,000, assumingly, or maybe higher than that, maybe 60,000 rupees or 80,000 rupees. Now, why that 80,000 rupees? Now, if you actually say that, okay, fine, what we are going to do is we are going to monitor the whole system of your robot and the cleaning of your house or the office, and we are going to actually make that robot and automate that robot, so that you can actually see that robot cleaning your house and the cleanliness of your house remotely from somewhere, and we are going to give you that sort of support for 24/7, right? Or we can actually give you the support for or the after sales services, or the warranty of the parts, for next 3 years, 4 years, and so on and so forth. That is basically what you're doing, is you're actually creating an extra value. You're giving that value added feature or the service, or maybe might be a possibility if you say that, fine, this is this security alarm that we discussed yesterday, not only would actually give you the alarm, but it is actually going to pinpoint the position within the building, that where exactly the fire is. Now that pinpointing is actually one of the value added features, right? What you are going to do is that you're actually asking the higher amount of your product or the service based upon one of the value added features that you are offering to your customers, right? So that is basically giving you the pricing power. Now what exactly is pricing power? It's actually described just below. The pricing power is the ability to escape the price competition. You might have a competitor who is selling at a reasonable price, but you are selling at the higher price, right? Why are you selling it at a higher price? You're selling it at a higher price because you are giving your customers some value added features, right? So that value added feature would actually let you escape from the market competition, and where you'd be able to charge the customer a little higher without losing the market value or the market share, right? So that is what a value added pricing is, that you give your customers something extra by charging the customer a little higher from the competitors without losing any market value or the market share. So the customer is again going to come to you. Why? Because you are actually giving the customer an extra feature which the competitors are not giving them. So there will be the customers who will be ready to pay for those extra features, for those value added features, right? That's what a value added pricing is, right? So what we have done right now is that we have seen the different segments or the different types of the value based pricing. One was the good value pricing, in which you give the quality and the services and the fair quality, or the quality of the product is good, and the price of the product is fairly compatible with the market. The second one is everyday low pricing. The third one is high low pricing. Everyday low pricing would be like any other grocery item. High low pricing, I've already given you the example of that. Then the value added pricing. So these are the 4 different types of your value based pricing that you can actually offer to your customers, right? But generally, remember that this value added pricing, the thing that we were actually discussing in this slide was that the value based pricing can be offered when you are actually giving some value added feature to the customers, so that the perception of the customer may be developed, or the belief of the customer can be developed, that these features will actually going to be helping the customer, where the competitors are not offering the customer the same features, right? That is where the customer is going to actually develop the certain perception and buy your product and pay you extra as compared to the customers for your product, right? Okay, so I hope this is pretty understandable, that let me repeat it again, that the pricing are basically either the cost-based pricing or the value-based pricing. So the cost-based pricing we are going to actually study in the in the next lecture, which is the part 2 of the lecture. And the value-based pricing actually value-based pricing has 4 different types. One is the good value pricing. The second one is everyday low pricing. Then there is a high low pricing, and then there is a value added pricing, right? So these are the four different types of value based pricing. Now this is the cost based pricing, which actually involves the setting the prices based upon the cost of the producing, distributing, selling and the product, plus a fair rate of return of for its effort and risk. Now this is exactly what we actually discussed in this slide earlier, that the cost based pricing is generally be determined by the amount of the cost being incurred on any of the on one unit of the product, and then what you do is you put a amount of a markup on that cost as your profit on that unit. So I hope that the basics of pricing is clear to you by now. And if you have any other question about the pricing strategies or the cost-based pricing and the value-based pricing and the different types of the value-based pricing, please do let me know either by commenting in the video or maybe what you can do is you can actually WhatsApp me, or you can actually put up the questions when we actually go online on next Thursday by 10 a.m. All right. So see you. Take very good care of yourselves.